Hello YouTube, it's the Drunken Kobold here, today with the motherlode of D&D products. Like, this is going to be hands down my favorite product since I bought my 1984 red box. This is the original Dungeons and Dragons medieval fantasy war game. Behold the game that started it all. The original Dungeons and Dragons game, published in 1974 and aimed at wargamers and medieval fantasy enthusiasts, created an entire industry of role-playing games, as well as legions of D&D fans worldwide. Relive the glory with this remarkable limited edition set, which includes 3 main rulebooks published in the original D&D game, plus 4 of the game's most popular supplements. All 7 books have been carefully updated and feature new cover art. So, for those who do not know, Dungeons & Dragons was published in 1974 and came in a white box, similar to the red box that you see on the table on the shelf behind me. The white box had 7 different print runs, each with a distinct difference from the previous, and that's how when you're collecting the original print runs you can tell the difference. Well, in 2013, just before 5th edition came out, 5th edition actually came a whole year later, Mike Mearls and Wizards of the Coast put together this product to commemorate the original game nearly 40 years later. So yeah, no, this is a great product, and I absolutely am thrilled to be able to open it on the channel with you guys. This product is not going to get a grade at the end. As far as I'm concerned, I am not qualified to grade the contents of this kit. So without further ado, let's get it open and see what's inside. So we have a letter from the man, Mike Mearls himself. These obviously just printed and put in every box. One thing that I noticed is that this box does not have like 1 of 1,000, 100 of 1,000. So I don't know how many of these were made, and it doesn't say in the box, but limited edition back then meant a lot more than it does now. So just keep that in mind when it does say that this is limited edition. Dungeons and Dragons. I don't feel particularly worthy of writing this letter. I don't feel particularly worthy of opening this box. I didn't pioneer an entire industry, blaze the trails of gaming, or start my RPG career with this set of D&D rules. To be fair, I didn't start my RPG career with this set of D&D rules either. I actually didn't start until June 29th, 2000, when Icewind Dale, the video game, came out for the very first time. I got it on release day with my cousin, so. I was one of the many who came later in the heady days of early 80s when D&D spread out from college campuses and science fiction conventions to middle school cafeterias and high school study halls. We who came later owe a debt to this remarkable game. It is a declaration of independence. It taught us that the stories we want to tell are as important as any movie or television show. It taught us that the rules are there to obey us. It forged us into creators. It equipped us with the confidence to find our own voice and speak aloud in a world that prefers we be quiet and take what we're given. Isn't that the truth? Even now, hell, this is 8 years later, and that's still true. Come now, let us step down from the shoulders of giants and revel in D&D's humble origin, for this is where it all began. Mike Mearls, February 2013. I'm going to hold that there so you can pause and read it yourself if you want to. Okay. So we're going to pull this red band here, and we're going to have the books come out. Now, I've already taken the time to take the plastic off of these just to save time on the video, but I haven't actually had a chance to look at the books themselves, so this is going to be as new to me as it is you. So first we have Dungeons & Dragons Rules for Fantastic Medieval War Games, campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures, Book 1, Men in Magic by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. So I love that these artworks aren't exactly the original artworks. It means that you never have to worry that if you buy these that you don't know what you're getting. Whereas the original 7 print runs all featured the same art, and it's actually distinctions inside the book or on the box even that help you tell the difference. So the fact that these are very distinguishable from the originals is actually preferable to me in this case. Inside here you have a foreword written by Gary Gygax himself on November 1st, 1973. So this was written about a year before Dungeons & Dragons actually got published in 74. For those who don't know, Dungeons & Dragons required use of 2 other games, one by Gary Gygax called Chainmail, and another called Outdoor Adventures by Avalon Hill, which, if I'm not mistaken, actually also got purchased by Wizards of the Coast. So go figure that Wizards of the Coast literally owns everything D&D these days. So Men in Magic has three playable classes. You can be a fighterman, a magic user, or a cleric. And then there are 4 races to choose from. There are human, elf, dwarf, and in the original print runs of the White Box, it was called Hobbit from Lord of the Rings. After a lawsuit from the Tolkien estate, in future prints of Dungeons & Dragons, even in further White Box prints, it was called Halfling. Inside, this book uses all the original artworks and layouts that you found in the original White Box books. Now, something about the artworks then is Gary Gygax and Arneson had a $2,000 budget for the first print run of the White Box. It was made to have 1,000 copies, and they paid you $2 for a small sketch and $3 for a large for the first print run, and then for every print run of 1,000 that came after, of which there were 6, you got repaid that. So in the second print run, they were printing 1,000, you got paid another $2 per artwork or another $3 per artwork, depending on which artworks you contributed. And, you know, to be fair, a lot of these artworks, you can tell they were done by, like, you know, family, friends, and close friends, not professional artists by any stretch of the imagination. So it's actually really cool. And, like, these books feel like the original cardstock of a OG Dungeons & Dragons White Box book, and the pages feel like the authentic pages. I've had a chance to hold the original White Box, but I've never owned it, and I've never got a chance to play it. So this is a huge first for me, and I am the equivalent of starstruck right now. Dungeons & Dragons Monsters and Treasure. This is book 2 from the White Box and has tables for treasure and monsters. As you can see, there were nowhere near as many monsters in the OG Dungeons & Dragons as there are today. There is still quite a few monsters in here though, and you could definitely run a short campaign with this. Inside, when you open, there is the artwork, and there is no foreword for this book because books 2 and 3 use the same foreword and dedications that are in book 1. Book 3 is The Underworlds and Wilderness Adventures by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. I'm actually not sure. Oh, this is actually pretty cool. So here is an original dragon art of the very first Dungeons and Dragons, as well as an original Hydra art. That's actually pretty cool. I wish that the artist who did the Hydra signed it too. Here is a map of the Underworld. So this is actually like the equivalent of having hell in your game. That's actually pretty cool. Sample map of Underworld level. So there's the sample map. Mapping has also come a long way since 1974. I do like when I see maps that are like this in new games. Not necessarily this rough of detail, but you know, the black and white square-shaped grids. We actually had them in Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which was a dungeon crawl. So that was pretty cool. So yeah, no, this is a pretty cool book. All right, so these are the 3 core rule books of the original game. So we'll put those there. Next is book number 4. And this is a substantially thicker book. It's the very first supplement released for Dungeons and Dragons, and it is Greyhawk by Gary Gygax and Rob Kuntz. I really hope I am pronouncing his last name right, but sorry, Rob, if I'm not, if you are even still alive. So this one has a foreword also by Gary Gygax. One cannot properly introduce a supplement to an existing body of rules which already contain both a foreword and an introduction, yet it is absolutely necessary to make certain that the prospective buyer understands that this volume cannot stand by itself. It is expressly written to augment Dungeons and Dragons rules set, and if you do not possess the set, there is no point in buying this supplemental booklet alone. However, it does no harm to read further. It is hoped that if you do skim through the pages which follow, you will become so interested as to buy both D&D and this additional. So his writing actually isn't like the cleanest of writing. There's a lot of like really bad grammar and spelling here. He obviously couldn't afford a copy editor. If you enjoy fantasy, you will never be sorry you were introduced to the sword and sorcery of Dungeons and Dragons games. It's actually funny, there's a company called Sword and Sorcery that did 3rd edition third-party stuff. If you already own a set of D&D, then buy this booklet right now, for what is herein adds immeasurably to the existing game. And then it continues to describe what this product is. And that was written on February 1st, 1975. So about 2 years after the core rule books were written and published. One thing is interesting is Greyhawk was the book that allowed you to ditch Chainmail and Outdoor Adventures by Avalon Hill. Prior, you needed Chainmail and Outdoor Adventures to run these. For those who don't know, Chainmail is a miniatures war game that is more medieval fantasy based. You had miniatures of dragons, you had miniatures of people on horses, people with swords, wizards, etc. Not too dissimilar from the miniatures we see now, except they were usually made of metal and not pre-painted. And actually Wizards of the Coast in 2000 released a game called Chainmail, which was not a 4th edition of the original Chainmail, but was its own separate game, but had a lot of the same rules and mechanics. If you were to use 2000's Chainmail with the first 3 books in this set, it would not work. These were intended to use with Chainmail from the 70s and 80s. Now, Chainmail was a skirmishing game, and the intent of the skirmishing game was to bring back some of the original D&D origins, but also compete with games like Warhammer 40k and Flames of War. It did not succeed at that. So Chainmail became DDM, Dungeons and Dragons, a miniature skirmishing game. DDM miniatures came with the mini that used a 3.5 era basing size and a card with the information on how to use that figure in a skirmish. Those were later replaced with Dungeon Command, which I have opened on the channel before. And Dungeon Command actually completely redefined the skirmishing rules for Dungeons and Dragons, and DDM miniatures would not have worked other than being supplemental figures. Like if you had an Umber Hulk from DDM, you could use it as an Umber Hulk in Dungeon Command, but you would still need the Umber Hulk information that you got in Sting of Lolth. Well, that didn't work either. And then in 2014, we now have Icons of the Realms, which is strictly intended to be collectible miniatures and miniatures for your 5e Dungeons & Dragons game. They aren't intended to be used for skirmishing, whereas the original miniatures were intended to be used for skirmishing, and it was an afterthought that you could use them in your 3.5 and 4e era games. So if you wanted to use a Icons of the Realm figure to match a monster or a PC from this original box, you could, but you would need to use these stats and you would need to have the correct grids. The grid system for original Dungeons & Dragons is not squares, it's hexagons. And you can find hexagonal grids on the back of a vinyl Chessex mat. So just a little interesting D&D history for you there. Next, we have the legend Dave Arneson's creation, Blackmoor. So Blackmoor on its own is not easy to find. Dave Arneson left TSR not long after this, and went on his own way and brought Blackmoor with him. Blackmoor now, anything tied to Blackmoor and David Arneson fetches a premium over the original MSRPs. Originals from the 70s go upwards of a few $100s per copy, to even some stuff published in the 90s and early 2000s almost have tripled in MSRP value. So, and that is mostly because Dave Arneson was a really great game developer, but also that Dave Arneson is no longer with us. So, Blackmoor is done. We will never get more Blackmoor content unless Wizards of the Coast could work out a deal with the estate. But heaven forbid they do that. Please don't actually write more Blackmoor. So this is the original Blackmoor with updated artwork. And it uses all the original art from Blackmoor in it. And I'm actually getting kind of teary thinking about that. So you actually have information of what changes in Men in Magic when using this book. This is the introduction of thieves. So thieves were introduced here. You have new monsters to supplement your monsters and treasures. And yeah, no, this is actually really cool. And you got like a lot of new monsters here. So running Blackmoor is definitely, you would need a few more minis than, using monsters and treasure. Next is Book 6, Eldritch Wizardry by Gary Gygax and, Brian Bloom. I forgot his first name there. And this was the book that, if I'm not mistaken, introduced psionic combat to D&D. Forward here. The book you now hold in your hand represents new dimensions to an already fascinating game system. This is the third supplement to Dungeons & Dragons and was produced as a result of an ever-increasing demand for new material. This book also represents a new trend in the fine art of dungeon mastering. As originally conceived, D&D was limited in scope only by the imagination and devotion of dungeon masters everywhere. The supplements have fulfilled the need for fresh ideas and additional stimulation. But somewhere along the line, D&D lost some of its flavor and began to become predictable. This came about as a result of the proliferation of rule sets. While this was great for us as a company, it was tough on the DM. When all the players had all the rules in front of them, it became next to impossible to beguile them into danger or mischief. And, that's actually something that we as Dungeon Masters now have that struggle with, is books are widely accessible. Like, it's nothing for a player to own a monster manual these days, have read the monster manual, know the monster manual, and metagame knowing what they know from the monster manual. It's nothing for a player to go out and buy a copy of the newest module. So players now, we as Dungeon Masters face the same struggle that they were then, that players, it was accessible. So they were having to create new supplements to keep Dungeon Masters with new material and, keep players bewildered and, interested, intrigued, because they didn't know what was coming. The new concept pioneered within these pages should go a long way towards putting back in some of the mystery, uncertainty, and danger that make D&D the unparalleled challenge it was meant to be. Legend lore once again becomes the invaluable spell it was meant to be. No more will some foolhardily adventurer run down into a dungeon, find something, and immediately know how it works, or even what it does. Eventually players had this book, they knew, but, when new books come out and the Dungeon Master's the first to read them, there's that feeling of having something new, fresh and exciting added to the game, and it's something that I absolutely love when new books come out in Pathfinder 2e, in D&D 5e, when I'm getting old books for players that have never played an edition before. It's a feeling of excitement. The introduction of psionic combat is bound to enliven games grown stagnant. Yes, psionic combat. It opens up untold possibilities for both the players and the DM, and in so doing recognizes one of the favorite topics of science fiction and fantasy writers, the unknown powers of the mind. So that's actually really cool that Eldritch Wizardry introduced psionics to D&D. For all you players who love psionics in your game, whether you use Pathfinder psionics, whether you use the new stuff from Tash's Cauldron of Everything, whether you have the complete psionic compendium, you owe your favorite way of playing to this book right here. So that's pretty cool. Next, we have the last book in the box, is book 7, Gods, Demigods, and Heroes. So this is actually the book that introduced us to a lot of the mythology that we know in D&D. So, like, for instance, we have the pantheons of Forgotten Realms, but we also have the pantheons that we can use of Egyptian mythology, Norse mythology, Greek mythology. This is the book that introduced all of that to Dungeons & Dragons. Now, this, if I'm not mistaken, was the last This is the last supplement of original white box era D&D. This was published, this foreword was written in July 4th of 1976. Well, here it is, the last D&D supplement. It is with a strange mixture of sadness and relief that I tell you this. My first assignment, fresh out of college, was Blackmore. So that's actually kind of cool. The Timothy Kask, who does a lot of these forwards as TSR's publications editor, it's actually pretty cool. One sec, I just gotta close that right there. It's actually pretty cool that, his first project was Blackmore. I came to regard it with a mixture of love and loathing, then that has gradually seen the love win out. The loathing grew out of the educational trip that it was for me. They don't teach you in college what to do when the press breaks down or your manuscript gets mysteriously misplaced. You just have to wing it. Well, same applies to D&Ders everywhere. We've told you just about everything we can. From now on, the circumstances aren't covered somewhere in the books. Wing it. As we've said time and time again, the rules were never meant to be more than guidelines, not even true rules. So this was the last official printed supplement for D&D, and their plan then was to release more content in periodicals. So this volume does not herald at the end of D&D material. There will always be new material. 'Tis the nature of the beastie. There were many myths that couldn't be squeezed into this. Keep looking for new stuff in the future in the pages of our periodicals, those that didn't fit, as well as those aborting at this very moment. Just don't wait with bated breath for another supplement after this one. May you always make your saving throw. Timothy Kask, July 1976, July 4th, at Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. So that, reading that actually makes me really sad, that, they didn't see a future of new books and supplements for Dungeons and Dragons at this time. We know about a year later that we got Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master Guide, and Monster Manual. Those 3 books were a lot more comprehensive than the original 3 books, and a lot of these 4 books had their material redone for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, as more refined, comprehensive rules. But this was the end of the white box era as far as supplements. So that actually brings an actual tear to my eye. To know that this was at the end, at that time, what they thought might be the last supplement they published. And then we have reference sheets, which, to my understanding, are actually published by Wizards of the Coast to help us make sense of this. To be fair, just having read some of Gary Gygax's writing in the forwards, not looking forward to how he wrote as a game developer. But at the same time, really excited to read how he wrote as a game developer and see how much this game has changed. I started in 2 AD&D. I played 3, I played 4E, I played Pathfinder, and now I play 5E. And over the years, now I look back at some of my old 2 AD&D books, and I'm like, man, this game has changed. So this is a really good opportunity for me to see how much it has changed since day one. Once COVID is over, I actually want to run this at my local game store. Hopefully I won't be too dramatic while doing it. Like I said, I feel I feel a combination of, in a way, sadness and starstruck reading these books. These books are essentially modern era copies of books that came out way before I was even born. 1974, my mom, I don't even think my mom was born when these came out. Oh no, my mom was born in 73. Yeah, my mom was born in 73. So my mom was 1 year old when this book came out. I wasn't even a thought yet. And yeah, no, so like these are just like super cool, and I am super excited to get to play these. Now, inside the box, there isn't much to go over here. We have an ad for Dungeon Command, as well as an ad for dndclassics.com. I wonder if dndclassics.com is still up. You know what? I'm going to check and see if dndclassics.com is still up and if we can still get classic TSR material from classics.com. Give me 1 minute. Okay, so now we are going to see if D&D Classics. Okay, that's a plus that it does autofill. No, I don't want that. I want that. Okay, so D&D Classics has been replaced with the Dungeon Masters Guild. Right? dndclassics.com. Yeah, D&D Classics has been replaced with the Dungeon Masters Guild edition, and you can go original edition here, and this is where you will find all of your original books. So we have here Eldritch Wizardry, Demigod and Heroes, Greyhawk, Chainmail, Rules for Medieval Adventures. So I am going to need that to be able to play this authentically. And yeah, there are just 8 items here. I'll probably also print off Swords and Spells, and I think this might actually be the adventure I run for this. This is actually really, really cool as far as I'm concerned. So this is all the original Dungeons and Dragons stuff that is here as far as D&D Classics is concerned. Like I said, if we trash the edition there, you can find Basic, Expert, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition, though you won't find hardcovers for 5th edition there. All right, so back to the box opening. Okay, and we're back now with the final thing of the wooden box for the premium set, and that is these marvelous dice. It is a 10 die set starting with the D20 and ending with the D4. Let's get that ribbon out of the way. I will use the D6 since the art on it is the clearest, but these are clear plastic dice with gold filled artwork. Like, these are painted gold, and they fill the engravings on these dice. Holding these up to the light, like, you don't see an air bubble in them at all. So these are high quality dice that, as long as the edges stay crisp, will roll well for you for a very, very long time. I'm in love. I can't say anything else more, but I am in love with this product. I cannot wait to take this to my local game store. I know my LGS owner played with these books when they were young. I know a couple people in the community that played these. So I'm definitely going to be offering to run a couple games of original Dungeons and Dragons just to open up nostalgia for anybody who wants it and get an original D&D experience for myself. Wow, like this is just an amazing product. I still don't know how to feel about the fact that I own this product. I'm gonna keep this too. Oh, and the artwork on the inside of the box. That is just freaking cool. Like it looks like a magic card foil. Like that is just so cool. Anyway, so what did you think of this product? Like, have you had a chance to play with the white box, whether the 1974 original or this 2013 premium edition? What if you have? What are some of your advice for running this? Let me know in the comments down below. If you feel I deserved it, please leave a like and consider subscribing. It would mean the world to me. In the meantime, cheers, and in the words of Timothy Cass, I hope you make your saving throws.